Before we get started, this is just a little warning to say that there are quite a few swearies in this episode, but given that the main topic of conversation was Trump et al., I don't know what else you would expect.
The early days, oh, a better nation, fair and free, Scotland.
Hello, this is episode 140 of the Scottish Independence podcast, and it's the first one post-Trump. I'm with Robert Somynne, who's a journalist at the Common Space, also does a videolog, and is extremely interested in foreign policy matters. We talked about the Trump phenomenon in general, and then at the end we got on to how it relates to Scotland. Given that a snake oil salesman and a lunatic are now President and Vice President of the United States respectively, there isn't really much I can put in the introduction that gets to the gravity of the situation. Hopefully in the conversation we did that a little bit. So, here it is, and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Robert, how are you this morning?
I'm good, Michael.
So, the first thing obviously to ask you is that, well, a billionaire with lots of sex cases against him, fraud cases against him, accused of racism, sexism, sort of slightly orange looking. What do you think about Silvio Berlusconi being elected President of America?
I think it's a fantastic comeback. No, I mean, I think that, obviously there are massive similarities between Trump and Berlusconi. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to break Godwin's law, and I'm going to talk about Hitler really early on. Okay.
I heard that Godwin's law has been repealed, actually, since all of this has started happening.
Oh, yeah, yet another casualty of 2016. No, I mean, the reason why I break it is because liberals often like to talk about, Trump is like Hitler. And the problem is that they fail to kind of see the deep meaning behind how Hitler came to power. And one of the reasons why he came to power is the alternatives against him were seen to be too weak, too ineffective, and had lost their legitimacy. So, the guy may be an orange-tanned, racist, misogynist, bunga having loser, but you need to consider what he's up against. And he's up against an extremely ineffective centrist liberal consensus at the moment. So, it's even looking at Berlusconi. I mean, looking at his political history, he did so well in Italy, not only because, he owned AC Milan and, an entire news network, but also because his challengers were, a bit pish, frankly. So they've definitely got that extra thing in common as well. We need to think about who's criticizing Trump, who's criticizing Berlusconi, not us personally, but the politicians, the mainstream politicians going up against them.
One of the ways that Berlusconi did it was not necessarily having his media pumping out Silvio's fantastic, because that's just too transparent. It's not credible. The way they would do it was just all the opponents are ineffective and crap and they don't know what they're doing and nobody can get things done. And that was something we saw with Trump as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got two systems in which, I mean, it's true that the media, pump out things such as, your opponents are weak and ineffective, but there's a kernel of truth in that. Fascists are good at picking out kernels of truth and then exaggerating them. One thing that really upset me is this general liberal sneering at people who don't listen or pay respect to experts. And it's true, this whole post-truth world that we're living in. I really despise that phrase, post-truth. It's awful. It's full of liberal smugness. But you can understand why people don't necessarily have respect for experts who would warn us against demagogues. Because look at the 2008-2009 financial crisis. The experts failed to give us any inkling that it was coming. I think you had a few Nobel Prize economists who were dismissed as left-wing. But, people who analyze markets and traders didn't see it coming. People who are experts in the housing market didn't, expose that it was going to go kaput. People who are experts in polling failed. People who are experts in business, in trade. There are a whole range of people who claim to be experts, who claim to have a monopoly on sources of information, on sources of decision making, who have comprehensively failed. And of course, people are going to be scornful of experts because they all come across as part of this club. And I think the genius of people like Trump, even Berlusconi, is they present themselves in opposition to a class that might not be as liberal and elite as they make out, but they certainly present them as distant and not accountable to the majority of ordinary people, and that's how they get their foot in the door.
Do you think it's also, to a certain extent, that they pay people who know how to do that rather than they know how to do it themselves? I mean, one of the more famous things about the campaign was that Trump had his phone taken off him for the last week so that he wasn't able to communicate directly with people. You know, stand up there and say your lines, which shows that, for me, that also shows that it's not necessarily the sort of maverick type. There's lots of people behind him that are telling him what to do.
Well, yeah, that was the case in the last 2-3 weeks of the campaign. But I think the genius, and I use that word genius here, you can admire the some of the methods of someone that you revile. The genius of people like Farage and like Trump is that they make mistakes. That was a huge attraction. You talk to people, you go to a small town like Greensboro, North Carolina, or somewhere out in Arizona, and you say to people, yeah, but he's bumbling and he makes all kinds of mistakes and he sends out these tweets, and they like that. They really, really like that. The fact that he got his phone taken off him may have helped sway some middle-of-the-road conservatives or Republicans who might say, oh, well, he can be controlled, and they went out to vote for him. Maybe a few suburban people were attracted by the fact that they had managers who they paid well. But the huge sections of people who have swung to Trump actually really like the fact that he's not kept, he's not tidy, because that comes across as contrived. You know, these politicians who they have all these minders and they know what to say and they say the right thing and they always say something that's politically correct. They don't seem real because real people are bumbling. You know, real people make mistakes. They lose their head a little bit. So I remember thinking, you know, when I listened to American TV shows and they said, well, Trump is going to, fall out with Putin. He's going to be easily provoked. And I thought that would probably give him an advantage with a section of the American electorate who really dislike people being handled by advisors, actually.
But to go back to what you're saying about post-truth, I understand what you mean about there's a problem with the term, but maybe it's, you know, people only hear what they want to hear. I mean, apart from the Berlusconi analogy, I could easily have started this by, you know, a spoilt bully as president. Eric Cartman is the new president of the United States of America. I could easily have started it that way. And, you know, this idea that he's going to drain the swamp and he's a man of the people. This is a man that shits on a gold-plated toilet. I don't understand how people can look at one aspect of it and say, yeah, well, he makes these mistakes and so on. He's a normal guy, but then they see these photos of him with his gold-plated house and his gold-plated toilet and his multi-millionaire friends, and they honestly believe that this is a guy that's sort of out to help working people.
Well, it's a classic case of cognitive dissonance. You can have the ability to look at someone like Trump and think, oh, well, he's rich and he made his money while not being in politics. I mean, you think about Hillary Clinton, for example, very successful legal mind, very successful senator. I disagree with her policies, but you could say she's a successful secretary, or was a successful secretary of state. However, the Clintons fundamentally made their money while being in politics. I mean, they weren't rich before they entered politics. And in that sense, they are the perfect people for Donald Trump to run against, because he made his money outside, politics, and he could lay claim to being the ultimate symbol of American risk. Yes, he became bankrupt lots of times. Yes, he shits in a gold toilet, but he's that symbol of someone who, went out having inherited a lot of money and risked and failed and succeeded and failed and succeeded again. And a lot of people may be willing to trust someone like that compared, and always keep this in mind, compared to what was facing him, which was the symbol of socially liberal, pro-capital, pro-global market people who come into office and make all their money from being in politics. It always has to be seen within that context. I mean, I can completely understand why there may be some guy in Michigan who would honestly look at Donald Trump and think, do you know what? He may be a bit of a crude bastard, but he came totally from the outside. He's from the business elite, but he's not from the political elite. And the political elite have comprehensively failed me in every single way. Therefore, I'm going to give someone else a go. And of course, there was no other alternative. We didn't have a Bernie Sanders or someone else to go, do you know what? You're right. Things are a bit rubbish. We haven't done as much as we could have done, but he's not the answer. I'm the answer. There wasn't that alternative. And I think that's one of the main problems.
We'll talk about Hillary first and then we'll go on to Sanders. How bad do you have to be to actually lose to someone who has admitted to all of the things that Trump has admitted to, has said all the things that he said? How piss poor a candidate do you actually have to be to lose to that?
You have to be a pretty bad candidate. I mean, she certainly was the victim of a massive amount of sexism, either conscious or unconscious, internalized misogyny. Obviously, a majority of Caucasian women voted for Trump. I think there was a certain amount of racism that played into it as well, not necessarily against her, but she represented, advancement of people who are, black and brown, and that may have played into the vote also. She failed to consolidate working class people behind the Democratic Party. Although the majority of people who were working class voted for her, there was still, I think, about 16% swing, lower income people behind Trump. So on all measures, she failed. And I think it's to do with the fact that the Democratic Party were playing by the old rules. I honestly feel sorry for her. I don't necessarily see this as her specific problem. I see this as a problem of the Democratic Party and the problem of centrist liberal parties who don't understand that things have changed, that there may be a new rabid populism about, but what we need is to recognize that the existing systems of politics and economics have failed a large section of the population. I think there's a lot of people who are angry and who are inspired by demagogic and hateful speech. And we need to find a way in order to change the dialogue into something positive. We need to give actual hope, not sort of Barack Obama, I'm going to disappoint you 8 years later hope. And the issue is bigger than Hillary Clinton, although she was an exceptionally flawed candidate in many ways. It's bigger than her. It's about the way centrist liberal parties are trying to address the malaise we're in at the moment.
And that's the thing. I mean, that particular centrist liberal party, in a certain way, did corrupt their own selection process in order to make sure it was Hillary instead of Bernie. And do you think Sanders would have had a better chance against Trump?
Ooh, this is the $1 million question, isn't it? Part of me says yes. If you look at the polling, I mean, if you do look at the polling, Clinton was always within the margin of error against Trump. Sanders was always outside the margin of error and leading against every Republican. I think only Rubio would have been able to deal with Sanders in any significant kind of way. If we look at the polling, certainly, if we look at just political logic, look at some of the states that Clinton lost, such as Michigan, where that swing for working class voters, lower middle class voters really counted against her. Certainly, I find it difficult to think that Sanders would have lost those blue collar workers. If we look at it from another point of political logic, which is you need a change candidate, Sanders would have prevented a positive change candidate that could have unified sort of white working class, blue collar, white middle class, black voters. He would have engendered enthusiasm from Hispanic voters to turn out. Based on all that, I think you can say yes, he would have certainly done better. However, you could say maybe he would have fallen foul in a lot of border states, southern states, Midwestern states, where maybe his message of social democracy just wouldn't have hit home. So it's really tough to tell. But I certainly think he would have engendered a lot more enthusiasm and would have got those Obama voters from 2008 and 2012 to come out. So short answer, kind of yes, kind of maybe.
It's difficult because also a kind of right-wing neoliberal media would be perfectly happy to support Hillary because she's not going to rock the boat. But if it was Sanders that had been the candidate, then a lot of media groups might have been spooked by that and moved more towards Trump as well. So that could have increased Trump's vote.
Well, yeah. I mean, it certainly that's the weakness that Sanders has, is that presenting himself as a change candidate and a radical candidate, and also because of the whole historical thing with the Red Scare, with McCarthyism, which is really since 1950s been a staple of American life. There was really interesting polling that a colleague of mine, or a fellow blogger and podcaster of ours, Benjamin Dixon, who lives in Boston, did, where it showed that an increasing amount of young people, consider themselves socialist and social democrat and have no problem with that. And this stretches beyond the 18 to 25 marker. It goes into even 30s and people who are 30 to 35. So, I mean, that's an argument to say that actually people wouldn't have had much of an issue. People wouldn't have been scared away to Trump. Maybe he would have lost some middle-of-the-road Democrats, but the argument could be that he would have engendered such enthusiasm from the mass, the millions of American people who didn't even bother to vote, that it would have outweighed any of the centrist Democrats going over to Trump.